Here we go. Okay.
Thanks.
So since a bunch of you are here for the first time, just a few things to say in advance. One is that the class is designed for a couple of different purposes. Some people take the class as part of a conversion process to become Jewish. Other people are already Jewish and they're just learning things that they maybe learned once and forgotten or never learned. Okay, so whatever reason, I think it's all great, and I'm gonna try to. I think the class should be compelling for people in any category. The other thing that's a little challenging about the class, but that seems to be the way it sort of worked out, there's no beginning and end. The class sort of offered a few times a month, and when we finish this curriculum, we just start again from the beginning. So this cycle, I think this is the third time I've gone through the whole cycle. This is now, I think, the third class of the second cycle, I believe. So all the classes are recorded. You can find class 1 and class 2 on the Shul YouTube channel and watch at your convenience. You could watch the entire series from last cycle if you want on YouTube, if that is interesting. You can compare last cycle and this cycle and see how the teaching changed.
How many classes in a cycle usually?
Between 20 and 30.
20, 30?
It depends how fast
Right in the beginning.
we were right at the beginning, yeah. This is
Right there, Sean.
so exactly, to catch up, exactly. The other thing, the scheduling is a little bit erratic because I guess like all these other things that are happening in holidays and travel and things that come up in my schedule and the Jewish calendar, so we can't meet quite as regularly as I would like. For a while we were meeting on Tuesdays, for a while we were meeting on Mondays. I still, long-term, am not certain about what's going to happen, but the next time we're meeting is going to be again back in our home. I think most of the time we'll meet in the shul, so that's a little bit easier.
What is the next planned class topic? Or is that something that you just
It'll be whatever we don't get up to this time, we'll start next
Understood.
time.
Okay.
Is that? Okay. So I believe, you have it. So I think last time, so in Roman numeral, the first page, we are now Roman numeral 1. Last time, the last two classes, we did A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Sort of H, I, J is what we're up to there. Okay? That's what we're up to. So, Achronim and Contemporary. So we've been talking about the history of Jewish law, the history of the process by which the Torah, the written Torah, and then the oral tradition. If I say, again, since you weren't here for the last class or the class before, if I say something that you don't know, I mean, some of it, so you can just stop me if I say like a term that's unfamiliar that you feel needs defining. Okay? So I don't want to like redo the entire last two classes, but I'll do like a 30-second, 2-minute executive summary, right? Judaism believes that God revealed a law to the Jewish people, made a covenant with the Jewish people at Sinai, at Mount Sinai, and gave Moses the Torah. And over the course of Moses' career, he taught the Torah, and what Moses wrote, dictated by God, was the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the 5 books of the Torah. But in addition to that written Torah, we also believe there's an oral Torah, an oral tradition, accompanying that written tradition. That oral tradition was how to understand the written tradition, how to read it, how to make sense of it, and all sorts of details that are not explicit in the written Torah. The oral Torah, the oral tradition also contains the charge, the empowerment to interpret the Torah to figure out what it means. So things that are ambiguous in the Torah, which is kind of it's a short 5 books of Moses, they're short, not that much, are expanded and developed and interpreted by the oral tradition over centuries to create its vast oral tradition. Around the year 200, that vast oral tradition is codified and edited and culled into a work called the Mishnah, which is a nice, neatly organized collection of the oral Torah. It's divided into 6 different sections. I don't know if I talked about the 6 sections, but in terms of it's worth sort of listing them as a sense of what are the topics of the oral Torah. What does the oral Torah delve into? So 1/6 of the Mishnah is about, it's called Seder Zera'im. it's the laws of agriculture. Right? The Torah has many, many rules about farming and tithing produce and ways first fruits have to be treated, etc., and gifts to the poor from your field. And this is expanded into several tractates, several different sections of this 1/6 of the oral tradition that deals with agricultural law. Also included in that is the laws of blessings before and after food. That's also there. Mishnah talks about this. The next 6 of the Mishnah deals with the calendar, the laws of Shabbat, Sabbath laws, the holiday laws, the seasons, mourning, customs. Okay. Next, that's the third, sixth. Next 6 is deals with marriage and divorce, and all sorts of complicated things that and things more complicated than simple marriage and divorce. But it's about family relationships and how they're regulated and how they're formed, etc.
That's awesome.
That's your phone? Oh, that's fine. Okay. As long as it's not my kids. That's fine. Gia, is it okay? Can you answer it? Or is it...
No, I can turn it off.
That's fine. It's all right. Next is Nezikin, is like interpersonal damages, right? Laws of collecting business, fraudulent business practices, paying your workers on time, and what if my cow eats in your garden and tramples in your right? All sorts of interpersonal. That's another 6th of the oral tradition deals with those types of laws. Next is all of the various sacrifices, the offerings and sacrifices that the Torah describes in many of the details, but expanded into many, many more details of details in the oral tradition. And the 6th, that final section of the Mishnah, is the regulation of purity and impurity, right? In the times of the temple, you had to be in a state of purity to enter the temple and to eat sacred foods. We don't have a temple anymore, we don't have sacred foods anymore, so this is sort of, for the most part, except for a few remnants of these systems, don't really have it anymore, but that was also the 6th of the Mishnah. So this was completed. The Mishnah was added around the year 200. Once that was done, this then created the basis for the next several centuries of further study and discussion and debate and analysis. Because the Mishnah will say, here's law in this case, here's law in that case, very, just doesn't give you reasons, doesn't give you analysis, it just tells you case A, case B, here's this law, here's that opinion. Sometimes often it'll tell you multiple opinions without telling you who's right, whose opinion is authoritative for how we determine the law. And so once you have the Mishnah, that then becomes, it elicits, it requires further interpretation and study. And the several centuries of argument and conversation that grew out of the Mishnah, that eventually became the Talmud. And this was done in the land of Israel, in Palestine, that's called the Palestinian Talmud, or the Jerusalem Talmud, and then it was done more successfully in Babylonia, and that's called the Babylonian Talmud.
Talmud, you said?
Talmud, yeah.
Okay.
So the Talmud is really the Mishnah plus the Gemara, plus the interpretation, later interpretation, and discussion surrounding the Mishnah. And if you go to the videos, you'll see a video of me pointing in the books and showing what it looks like. You were there for that, right? Or you missed that, or you were?
No, I remember you mentioned it last time, for the
Okay,
following one,
fine.
that you were going to bring it in, but then I couldn't make it.
Okay,
that
so it's on the video. It's on the video. Yeah, it's important and it's worth seeing. I'll bring a book. All right, stay there. I'll bring some books. So,
when you study Torah, for example, I know the timeline of everything, but you actually have to know everything is in the book. So for example, you know, the חמישה חומשי תורה. You have to know exactly, like, you know, what's going on word by word inside the 5 books.
Like memorize, you mean, or like to have like?
Yeah, memorize. I mean, like, you know, like.
No, and meaning I don't think so. I mean that.
Like, do you sit and you study the like pasuk by pasuk, or like?
So I'll do a question. So there are. That's a good question. Let's. I think we'll do a little bit more, and then we're going to answer that question.
Sure.
Okay, that's a very good. It's actually an excellent question. So this is a version of the Mishnah that sort of was printed for like easy study and easy memorization. And kind of the editors laid it out in kind of nice columns, but it's just a very so it's a good one. So it says a law, very simple. For example, I'm trying to think. What's a good? Here's the discussion of Passover. Success of the Passover Seder, the celebration of Passover. Arvei Psachim, Simach LeMincha, Lo Yochal Adam Ad Shetech Sha'achei. So when it becomes the night before Pesach begins, you shouldn't eat anything right before the sun sets, until it gets dark. V'afilu ani sheb'Yisrael lo yochal ad sheyaseh. And even a poor member of the Jewish community should only eat at the Passover Seder when he is reclining. Lo yifchatu lo mi'arba'a kosot shel yayin v'afilu min hatamchui. And you should make sure he has no less than 4 cups of wine, even if he's eating from the soup kitchen in public lands. That's the Mishnah. So it's incredible. It assumes a lot of prior knowledge. It doesn't start out in the way if you were writing about Passover, you would say, so there's a holiday, and the 15th of the month this is when the holiday is, and we said, and the night of the holiday we have a Passover Seder, and to make sure we're ready for the Seder. Don't eat beforehand, so you're hungry when the Seder begins, and you have 4 cups of, like there's an obligation to drink 4 cups of wine, and then even a poor person, right, you would go about it in a very different way. So it's the way it's organized. It contains the information. I mean, it's organized, I think, for easy memorization. So I think that's one of the ways in which it was edited. But it raises as many questions as it answers. And so once you have a Mishnah, then we just come up with question after question after question, and to answer those questions, we'll go back to biblical verses and say, oh yeah, where do we get these obligations for cups of wine? What's that about? Is it a legal obligation? Maybe there's a rabbinic enactment, a piece of rabbinic legislation, post-biblical legislation, not something from the Torah itself, or maybe it was derived from a verse in the Torah. Are there some other early sources from the same time period as the Mishnah that we can look to that maybe fill in some clues from missing material? And so those types of conversations, that's the Talmud. So just to show you, the way the Talmud is printed, you can see sort of the large letters here that signify a Mishnah begins. So here's a few lines of Mishnah, just similar to the Mishnah that I just read to you, although it's a different topic, but similar. Goes for a few lines, and then these big letters say, okay, that's the Mishnah's over, and now we have the Gemara. Now we have the learning, the conversation, the analysis of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is these few lines, Gemara.
Yeah. Which language is this? Like
Mostly Aramaic.
Aramaic, right?
Yeah.
So do you know how to read it?
A bit, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're supposed to know.
To learn Talmud, you need to learn Aramaic.
You have to learn Aramaic. Okay.
Yeah. So here's the Gemara. The Gemara's discussion about the Mishnah, which goes on for a couple of pages. It goes on for a while, until you get to right here. You get the next Mishnah. Okay, and this Mishnah goes from the bottom of this page, a few lines, and then it's the end of that Mishnah. Again, the Mishnahs are all short. They're all relatively to the point. They all raise questions as many as they answer, and then the next several pages of the Gemara, the analysis. On the side, so this was, so the part in the middle, the Mishnah Gemara, was the Babylonian Talmud. Was completed between the year 500 and 700 of the Common Era in Babylonia. It was also probably memorized. It probably wasn't written down until much later. It was eventually written down. It was spread throughout the Jewish world in manuscript form, in scrolls, and eventually, when the printing press was invented, Jews loved the printing press. You can see data on this. Like, printing press was invented in, I remember, 1450 something. The first printing. Okay, around here. Okay, within 100 years, you can see the number of books that were printed in Hebrew versus other languages. Jews really embraced the printing press, especially in Italy. There were a number of printing presses in Italy. They weren't necessarily owned by Jews, but they were printing Jewish books. The Talmud was one of the early books that was printed, and when the Talmud was printed, it was printed with commentary. So the commentary on the inside margin of the Talmud is the commentary of Rashi. Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, who lived in France, died in the year 1105, you think? And he goes line by line throughout the Talmud and wrote a guiding commentary. Rashi will help you if you don't know Aramaic so well.
Rashi, Rambam, all those so
Yeah.
they take the pasuk, and from the pasuk they're giving the comments of what does it mean, from this point.
So Rashi wrote a commentary on the Torah as well,
Okay.
on scripture. He also wrote a commentary on the Talmud. And then he wrote other things as well. Those were the two major initiatives. He is the master of the to-the-point, succinct comment. If he needs 5 words to say something, he won't use 6, he won't use 4, right? He was just a master of that genre. So if there's a word that needs explaining, if the comma is assuming something, there's a gap, a logical gap, he'll fill it in. Don't worry, they'll explain this word you don't know, this concept. They get to it in the next page, so just be patient. They'll get to it there. He holds your hand and guides you through it. He turns that before Rashi, you needed a teacher, a mentor in order to understand Talmud. Rashi allows you to study it without a teacher necessarily teaching it. Not that it's easy, but Rashi makes it a lot easier. And then the outside is the commentary of Rashi's grandchildren. Rashi's grandchildren, his actual grandchildren, and their colleagues, known as the Tosafot, who lived in northern France and Germany, 2 generations after Rashi, thereabouts, and they engage in a sort of second-level order of analysis of the Talmud. Now that Rashi tells you what the Talmud means, Tosafot then say, well, you don't really know what it means, because it says this here, but over here it says something that seems to contradict it, and how can we understand these two passages in light of one another, and can we resolve that contradiction in a way that yields us something new that we didn't know before. That's okay.
So it's in the center, that is the Mishnah?
Mishnah and the Talmud, Mishnah and Gemara is in the center, that's like the core Talmud, and then the inside column is Rashi, the outside column is Tosafot.
I learned it at school when I was a kid. I don't remember everything, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it was part of the learning system in high school.
Sure.
And I think when we learned Rashi, all the big, so all the time was like something was contradicting the other. So how can this be if this being said? So
yeah.
Giving all kind of explanation. It's said under this circumstances, So it's not necessarily contradicting one another.
Right, exactly. And it's especially Tosafot. Rashi is really interested in just what does this word mean? What does this phrase mean? What is this?
What is this? Not one answer to
one
question.
Exactly. That was his agenda. But now that someone does that, the next step is to then let's look at the whole thing, the big picture. Okay. So the scholars who interpreted the Talmud, like Rashi and the Tosafot and Ramban and Rambam and others like them, and then they figured out Jewish law, Jewish practice from their own interpretation of the Talmud. Those scholars are generally known as Rishonim, which means the early ones. They didn't know they were the early ones. They just thought they were studying Torah, but that was their agenda. That was how they developed Jewish law. And they also wrote poetry, they wrote philosophy, they wrote commentary on the Bible as well. So some famous Rishonim, names like Rashi, that we just mentioned, Ramban Nachmanides, who lived a little bit later. He lived in Spain, in Christian Spain. In 1263, he was in part of a disputation, which the king put Judaism on trial. Ramban defended Judaism. He won the debate, according to him, but his life was in danger. He had to flee, and he ended up in the land of Israel. He lived in Jerusalem, where he revived a tiny, tiny Jewish community there, and that's where he finished his commentary on the Torah. and that's where he died around the year 1270. Thereabouts. But he also wrote a commentary on the Talmud, and that was very important amongst the. I think some of this we did last time, but you weren't here, so it's okay. I might repeat myself. Very important amongst the Rishonim that is Rabbi, Maimonides, who was a really path-breaking in his philosophy, sort of reconciling Judaism and Greek philosophy. That was seen as a very important thing to do in where he lived at that time. But he also was a great Torah scholar, legal scholar, and wrote a magnificent code of Jewish law. So he saw all the flaws in the Talmud, that it's complicated, the arguments seem to go without clear conclusions, it starts in the middle and assumes prior knowledge. So he was going to start from scratch and write a beautiful 14-volume code of Judaism that would tell you everything you have to know except for what's in the scripture. So you have the Torah, you have the Hebrew Bible, and you have his book that he wrote, and that would be all that you would need. So it's a masterpiece. It's called the Mishneh Torah, the recapitulation, the repetition of the Torah. He wrote in beautiful, clear Hebrew. Everything else he wrote was in Arabic, but this he wrote in Hebrew, in a beautiful language. He failed in replacing the Talmud. That didn't work out that way. But his book then also became then a tool for scholarship, right? Again, because Maimonides says this in his code. How does he understand the Talmud to get to that conclusion? So his code also became a source of further scholarship and a subject of scholarship. Okay, moving along. What happens to the era of the Rishonim? So in the 13th century, 1200s, anti-Semitism in Christian Europe gets much worse. And you have, in the 14th century, it gets even worse. And so you have massacres and expulsions. Jews are expelled from much of France and much of Germany in the 13th and 14th centuries.
Which one? 13 to 14?
Yeah, so the 1200s and the 1300s. You have a lot of the scholarly leadership dying, being exiled.
This is your side?
No, this is from France and Germany, as before. France and Germany were not, especially Germany. Germany was not really a country back then. It was just a lot of small little principalities and states. And so if you were expelled from one, you could go to the other. It wasn't but it was still pretty bad. You have in these years, towards the end of the 13th century, you have Maharam of Rothenburg fleeing Germany to Spain to escape persecution. He's caught while on his escape and is returned to Germany, where he's held for ransom by the emperor. He refuses to be ransomed, realizing that if he were allowed himself to be ransomed, it would put other rabbis at risk, and he spends, 5-6 years in prison, dies in prison. His student, however, escapes to Spain. His student is known as Rabbi Asher Bar Yechiel, who makes it to Spain, ends up in Toledo, and becomes a rabbi there. So he was a student of this great Torah teacher from Germany. He ended up in Spain, and so he absorbed the Torah culture and the traditions of Spanish Jewry as well as German Jewry. And his son, who was a little bit younger when they made that move and had more of his life in Spain, wrote a code of Jewish law called the Arba'at Turim, the Four Pillars. And he decides, other than Maimonides, he's not going to rewrite everything in the Talmud. He's just going to give a practical guide that's just going to focus on what you need to know in order to live a Jewish life right here, right now, in Spain, without a temple, without any of the agricultural laws and mitzvot of the land of Israel, just basic daily practice. And so he divides Jewish law into 4 Torim, 4 pillars. Orach Chaim, way of life, which is waking up in the morning through going to bed at night and all the seasons of the year. Next is a section on marriage and divorce and those types of interpersonal relationships. Next is a section on ritual law, like keeping kosher and all the other ritual laws of Judaism, mitzvot of Judaism, and business ethics and business practices and interpersonal things of that sort. So 4 sections, and each section is divided into what we call called simanim, which in English should be like I think the fancy English word is pericope, which is, I don't know if is that a word you've ever heard? Probably not, right? Okay, it's a word I never heard except as a translation for this word siman. It's like sections, not really chapters, but they're like, so within, for example, within Orach Chaim is the first section, which talks about waking up in the morning through going to bed at night, and then all of the Jewish calendars, Sabbath and the holidays, goes through them all. So number 318 is the laws of cooking, the prohibition against cooking on the Sabbath, and the restrictions about surrounding cooking on the Sabbath and heating food on the Sabbath. So it's Orach Chaim number 318. It's not really chapter 318, it's just like section 318, right? All right? Now, here's what happens next. So he finishes that in the 14th century. Then you have, things get worse. Okay, Jews are being banished from Europe. If you can imagine a map of Europe, Jews are leaving France and Germany. For the most part, they're going to the east, settling in Poland. Poland and Hungary, but Poland welcomed Jews who were leaving France and Germany. 1492, Jews are expelled from Spain, and they end up in North Africa, some in Italy, some in Turkey, some in Greece, Syria.
This is like well, basically my ancestor went to
To where?
Yeah, like Syria, Iraq.
Sure.
Because they've been expelled from Spain.
Exactly.
There and then
Yeah, so there were Jews. There were always Jews in Syria and Iraq from thousands of years before. But when the Jews left Spain, many of them joined those Jewish communities in the Mediterranean basin, including as far as east as Iraq.
So this is most of the sporadic,
Exactly. So instead, when the Jews were in Spain and France, they were out in Germany, they're pretty close together. After these expulsions, they end up much farther apart. So the divide between the two communities, I think, gets a little bit broader. And there's upheaval, and there's turmoil, and it's a really traumatic time period. When the dust settles, Torah scholarship revives. And you have an exile from Spain, who's living now in the land of Israel, in the little village in the north of Israel called Tzfat. And he decides he's going to write a scholarly, encyclopedic commentary on the Torah. Again, it's the same pattern. You have this wealth of material, and it's a little bit chaotic, and then somebody organizes it and culls it, and you have something very concise and well-defined, and then that thing that you then make nice and neat becomes the center of like the next stage of discussion, argument, commentary, and then somebody comes along and culls and codifies and makes it nice and neat and organized. Sort of summarizes the last several generations of scholarship, summarizes it, distills it into something nice and neat, and then that's like the cycle of Jewish history. The oral Torah gets like made into the Mishnah, you have the Gemara, the Talmud, and then you have, let's say, the Torah and Rambam writing, distilling all of that into codes. And then you have this fellow in Tzfat writing an encyclopedic commentary on the Torah. His name is Rabbi Yosef Karo. And the same time that he had that idea, there was another fellow in Krakow, in Poland, who also said, the Torah, I should write an encyclopedic commentary on the Torah. It's going to explain all the sources, explain all the things he misses. And the one who got there first, who published first, was Rabbi Yosef Karo in Tzfat. So he wrote this very, very long, important scholarly encyclopedic commentary on the Torah that's called the Beit Yosef. And in Krakow, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, once he realized he was beaten to the punch, he wrote a much shorter commentary on the Torah where he just says, these are some of the Ashkenazi, the French and German traditions that the Torah didn't know about, didn't include, and I'm going to add those to the page so that they can be part of the conversation as well. I'll show you that. I'll show you the video. I'll show you. So this is one of the lines of the Torah, and it looks kind of similar, right? In the middle is the Torah itself, trying to be pretty straightforward, concise, practical, although he quotes multiple opinions, it's not. And then on the side you have this sort of very large encyclopedic commentary of the Beit Yosef, where he is explaining all the sources of the Torah, sort of summarizing all of the other material of the Rishonim, of those early Torah scholars, right? So the Torah says, here's the law, and here's the Talmudic passage he's basing himself on, and here's how Rashi understood that, here's how Ramban understood that, here's how the Rashba understood that, and here's what I think is right, and here's how the Torah ruled and why, and that's the Beit Yosef. And then on the side here, a little bit, a few lines here, a few lines there, a few lines here, there's the Darchei Moshe, the much shorter commentary of Moshe Isserlis from Krakow, who, since the Beit Yosef published first, all he had to do was all was left for him to do was to add in, these are some Ashkenazi, some German and French Torah scholarship that was left out of the conversation, so he puts that in. Okay? So then, Rabbi Yosef Karo has another idea. So he says, now that I've written this encyclopedic, expansive commentary, let me write like a nice, simple, short book that can be a basic guidebook for every Jew. You don't have to be a big scholar. If you sit down, you spend 20 minutes a day, you'll read the whole thing in 30 days. 20 minutes a day, you can do a cycle, you read the whole thing every 30 days, just to keep you current and fresh. I'll keep the same codification. So number 318 in section 1 will still be about the laws of not cooking food on Shabbat. I'll keep the same numbers, but instead of being lengthy, and I'll just be very short and to the point and succinct. And I'll, again, distill all of that earlier scholarship into just bottom line, here's what to do. And the same time that Rabbi Yosef Karo and Sfat had that idea, with Moshe Isserlis in Krakow, had they also an identical idea. And once again, Rabbi Yosef Karo and Sfat beat him to it and published first. And so he wrote this like very short, succinct, to the point code of Jewish law called the Shulchan Aruch. And Rabbi Yosef Karo was left to just add a few little glosses, a few little comments here and there, saying, and in Poland, the Ashkenazi practice is different. We do it this way, as opposed to that way. So I'll show you that too.
Yeah, like a set.
So this is the Shulchan Aruch. This is one of 15 volumes of the Shulchan Aruch. And I said this is a very short little book that you could read in
20 minutes.
Yeah, 20 minutes a day, 30 days. Yeah. So here's what happened. Okay. So the Shulchan Aruch is actually pretty straightforward. It's not that elaborate, but it became so popular that it itself then became the focus of the following several centuries of commentary. And so this, right? And so again, it's the same pattern of you distill, you take everything that's been said before for a couple hundred years and you distill it, here's the bottom line, here's the guide, here's what to do, and then, everyone's like, okay, they look at these, list each word and what are all the cases that are included here and why, and what are this other case that's, would still be the law will still be the same, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So how deals with the do and not do of way of eating? Or
Sure, everything.
Everything in life?
Yeah, everything except but not meaning it's based, because it's based on the Torah, it's only practical guidance. So it doesn't include anything practical for Spain, so it doesn't include any of the laws that are only for Eretz Yisrael, only for land of Israel. So none of the farming laws, none of the agricultural laws. It doesn't include anything with the Beit HaMikdash, with the temple, about korbanot, about sacrifices, none of that material is in the Shulchan Aruch. It's just what was practical and necessary for everyday life, for
to keep your Jewish
yeah.
life in track.
Correct.
Like that? Okay. It's new to me too. I know the things, but it's
Good,
better, so I'm learning too. So
Good. So what you may notice, I'm going to tell you, is that there's a shift that's taking place, though, between the Rishonim and what we now call the Achronim. The Rishonim, you see, whenever, it's true in general history as well, people in the Middle Ages, they didn't know that they were in the Middle Ages, right? Nobody got up and said, oh, it's the Middle Ages, right? They didn't realize they're in the middle of anything, they just were, right? At some point, people realized, oh, we're no longer, things are different now, and what came before us, we're not like that anymore.
Right.
And then they started talking about it as the Middle Ages, right? Only when they were over. So Same is true with Jewish history. So you could say, a dividing line is the expulsion from Spain. You could take events that happen in Jewish history and say that's when you divide it. It's also possible to see that periodization, that division of history into time periods, as pivoting around like a change in the way people wrote. So the Rishonim, those early scholars, they wrote commentaries on the Talmud. The Achronim wrote commentaries on the Rishonim. Right? That's what the Beit Yosef is. He's writing a commentary on, the book that he's writing the commentary on is the Torah.
So it's the evolving of the Torah.
Exactly, yeah. It's like the next stage. So
Is that how they describe the actual shift? Like the dividing line?
I don't, it's kind of like at some point people stopped feeling confident enough to read the Talmud in a way that no one had ever read it before, and to then derive, like, I'm going to observe the Sabbath based on a way of reading the Talmud that no one has ever done before. People stopped doing that at some point. They were like, no, they didn't feel authorized to be quite that creative. Instead, let me analyze what all the Rishonim said and all of their positions on how to keep the Sabbath, and then I'll engage my scholarship to focus on their words and understanding their words better. And there's still room for enormous creativity, and there are new cases that arise as technology changes and the way people live changes. So, there's no limit to creativity, but the way people write and the way people speak changes over time. Now that has also, there's been maybe another further evolution, because if the Achronim are writing commentaries on, the Rishonim, the Achronim are writing commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, for example, rather than on the Talmud. So people at some point stopped writing commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. Okay? Meaning, I guess this version was printed in the late 19th century, so there wasn't much room left on the page, but you could put out your own edition with your own commentaries, and there was early 20th century commentary on one part of the Shulchan Aruch called the Mishnah Berurah, which was published, when was it printed? It was printed, the author died in the 1930s. I think it was printed in his lifetime. So it's an early 20th century work. As far as I know, he's the last person to write a comprehensive commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. So what has happened since then? Okay. Since then, there's still been enormous creativity in Jewish law, but it hasn't been commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. It's taken two forms. Jewish legal creativity comes in the form of, for example, books like this one. Three examples. Okay, compendia, right? One volume books that treat a topic, in sort of a comprehensive way. So this is like a distillation, right? This is a distilling several hundred years of codes and commentary, and this is the English version. Okay, so these books of this sort became very popular in the 20th century and continue to be written on all sorts of topics. Okay, it's not really a commentary. It's not a code. It's a book about a topic. Okay, one book for one topic. And there are many of these that have become very, very popular. Here's the one on mourning. This is one on Shemitah, on the special agricultural law in the land of Israel. This is a 2-volume book on laws of Shabbat. Okay, it's a book on a topic. It's a very different genre than in what was written before, for the most part. Okay, and it's very, very popular now. Okay. And the other thing that has continued, another avenue of legal creativity, is Shelot Utshuvot, responsa, questions and answers. From the earliest time of Jewish law, Jewish history, people have asked questions, sent questions to rabbis and scholars, asking for guidance about particular topics. That happens to famous rabbis, happens to non-famous rabbis. I received three Jewish legal questions today. Right? People emailed me or called or texted, doing this, that, and the other thing. Is this permissible? Is that right? And so I texted back. If I were, I guess, a bit more famous, I would have saved my answer and eventually published it. Okay, so And so this is an example. This was a fifth volume of an 8-volume work published by a rabbi named Moshe Feinstein, who lives in New York City and died in the 1980s. And his open at random. Here's one, right? Relating to smoking cigarettes. Okay? This was, he wrote this letter in Tafshin Chafdal, which is 1964. Okay? So that's before or after the Surgeon General's report. Hine b'dvar ishun sigariyot v'day mikevod sheyesh chashash v'tachalot mizeh min ha'ra'ui lehizaher mizeh aval lomar she'asur me'isur sakanta kevon she'dashu barayim kvar itzik gemara b'kol agav neshavar patim Hashem. So he says, "B'frat shekam v'lo yitarbi hadar shavru v'doreinu shemashim v'meila afa il shemachmirin lechush lahasakana le'isur l'finat daiti shatat eish v'grafarim l'mi shemashem." Sorry, in like isur l'finat either. Sorry. So he says, even though there's some sort of like concern that smoking causes health risks, since everyone does it, it can't really be forbidden because it must be basically safe if lots and lots of people do it. And many very important rabbis in the earlier generations and even our generation smoke. And even if you want to be strict about smoking because of the risk, there's no prohibition to give a cigarette or give matches to somebody who else is smoking from this principle of you shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. You're not allowed to cause somebody or enable someone else to sin in Jewish law. That's a rabbinic interpretation of the biblical verse, not to place a stumbling block before the blind. So he says that prohibition does not apply to giving someone matches to someone. So there's an example. So it's a very contemporary issue. It's also, I don't know, I think he was writing in 1964, where the risk of smoking was, was known only a little bit compared to what we know now, and the commonness of smoking was much more widespread, obviously, than it is now. So it's interesting to see, to contemplate, to imagine what he would have said had he revisited that question in 2004, 2014, as opposed to 1964, right? Like what, as society has changed, as the dangers become more known, but again, he's dealing with contemporary issues, right? Can you smoke, or is it too dangerous to smoke? And can you give, if you don't smoke, are you allowed to, give a light to someone? Yeah, right? So, like Jewish law is alive, right? It's dealing with these questions. And he's
back in the day, it was like a topic of the century. It was like something that nobody knows what it is. So it's like
right, exactly. Meaning the new cases are because the new cases because medicine changes, because society changes, technology changes, the way people live change, and so new questions need to be dealt with, and that was what he, co-education, can girls and boys learn together in co-educational classes? Can you serve as a teacher in a synagogue school that have a different ideology that you don't like? It's there's an obligation to study the entire Torah. That's interesting. Okay, so it's incredible. It's just every imaginable topic that would arise in 20th century America. He was from Europe, so some of his cases deal with early 20th century Europe. He deals with that, and he just had the breadth of all of this background, and he brings it to bear with great sensitivity and great erudition and great discernment to respond to all the challenges. He was a very modest person. You could walk up to him and ask him questions. I never met him, but many people alive today knew him and were with him, studied with him. You ask a question?
No.
Okay. Everything. Okay. Questions, comments? Okay. We have finished Roman numeral 1. Okay? And I think since Roman numeral 2 is an entirely new topic, I think it makes sense to pause here. And we'll tackle Roman numeral 2 next time. The next time we're meeting, I think, has already been on the calendar, and I think that is
Next week, right?
next week. I think it's like a week from today, right?
Mhm.
The 24th, back here at this house. So we will start Roman numeral 2, which is Shabbat. Okay, so the positive, we'll start with the positive obligation for Shabbat. And then
I got it.
I like this topic.
I got a little confused because I saw it as though, I thought it was actually the same class on like the 17th and the 24th.
Oh, no.
So it's a continuation.
Yeah, sorry.
That's what I was
Sorry.
confused. But it all makes sense.
Now it all
now.
makes sense?
Totally.
Excellent. Good. Good.
All right.
So I guess I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like, it's based on my, like, you know, so I grew up in an Israeli typical home. Both my parents, like, you know, you can say religious, but not strict. They're not learning Torah, but, you know, they keep Shabbat,
Yeah.
they keep kosher. But I never understood the difference between the Ashkenaz and the Sephardic. So, for example, Yom Kippur came, or we need to go to the synagogue, we go to the Sephardic synagogue in Israel.
Yeah.
We don't go to the Ashkenaz synagogue because the prayer version are different.
Right.
Or like, you know, so what's basically like, you know, what's...
So since so much, you know, it's almost like, think of like, you know, some of these cases in like evolutionary history have like the turtles on this island, turtles on that island, and they get separated, and they develop differently, and then they looked, you know.
Mhm.
So you have Jews who are divided by geography, and they're each trying their best to follow the Torah and observe the mitzvot, and each other scholars who are studying Torah and teaching it, and they reach different conclusions about certain. So some of it is just a matter of it's about liturgy, it's about how we pray, which is not so much legal, it's just a matter of different customs, and each community developed its own customs of how to pray. And so much of the stuff in the synagogue, most of the differences are not significant for any, like, it's not an issue of law, it's just an issue of custom, and every community has its own custom. And some of them it's just, like different legal interpretations, because every community is trying to understand the Torah as best as it can, and different people reach different conclusions, and each community then follows its own traditions. In Israel now, you have, because everyone is kind of brought back together and mixed up again, you have some really creative...
So that's the thing, you know, it's very confusing. I think being in Israel is more confusing than, you know, being in a different country, because there's too many opinions over there.
So everything, it used to be you knew what to do. It used to be in a traditional world, no matter where you lived, you knew what to do. Everyone in your town did the same thing, and that's not the world we live in anymore. Everything's been uprooted. Even in America also, American Jewish communities are mixes of people from even Ashkenazim are people from Lithuania and Hungary and Poland and Germany and Russia, all have different customs.
So the way we live in right now, it's Orthodox Jewish stream?
That's my stream, that's my stream.
Orthodox stream, okay.
Yeah.
And so Orthodox is more, so the Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, right?
Yeah.
So what would be the main difference between the three streams?
The differences of those three streams are their relationship to Jewish law. Orthodoxy sees this entire process that I've just described, going all the way back to Sinai, as being obligatory.
Okay.
Like, every Jew is committed to the covenant, this relationship with God, which means all of this, the entire process. The Reform movement believes that the only permanent part of the Torah are the ethical elements of the Torah, but the ritual mitzvot, like observing the Sabbath in a certain way or keeping kosher, laws of kosher food, were not meant for all times and all places, and that each individual has to choose for him or herself what elements of Judaism to keep or not.
Okay, so they give you like the freedom of choice.
Freedom of choice, very good.
Okay.
And the conservative is a little bit in between. They believe that Jewish law is important, but they also believe that Jewish law should be interpreted with more flexibility, to be more responsive to the needs of the day.
Okay.
It's sort of a subtler difference.
So if I would like put it correctly, so in Israel they raise you almost as a conservative reform, because they don't impose everything on you. They don't say you have to do this by, by 1, 2, 3, like by the law.
Well, the government doesn't know what...
Not the government, I don't know, the education system, I would say.
Yeah, sure.
Or that's what it is?
That's a separate, everyone, in that sense, everyone in the modern world is free. So in that sense, we're all Reform Jews because everyone has freedom to choose what to do or not. But Orthodox Jews believe that even though we actually have freedom, we choose to commit ourselves to the authority of Jewish law. And Reform Jews say, no, like you always retain the right to make an autonomous decision about what you're going to accept and what you don't think is meaningful.
So basically, if I were to be like converting right now and I have to choose like the way of conversion, there's only one way you can convert that's recognized by the state of Israel, right? And this is the conservative, not the conservative, the Orthodox.
The state of Israel, the Interior Ministry recognizes any conversion done in the diaspora by a recognized congregation. The Rabbanut in Israel only recognizes Orthodox conversions.
Orthodox. Okay. Gotcha.
For now. We'll see.
That's my state.
I don't know.
If it's not my state, I'm going to get lost.
Yeah, Seth?
For these, where may I